Hey everybody, welcome back to another box office recap. Told you guys I'd get it done. It was a little bit later than per usual. It's just been real busy. Just had a lot of stuff going on. So finally got it done. Just this morning, just got up and just said, you know what, let me crack this out, and now we are done. So now we can talk about the recap of May. So. As you can see through my updates, periodically, I had some documented from the 8th, and documented from the 10th, and then documented this morning. Um, so, so let's get into this. So before we get into it, as I always like to do before we start looking at individual films, I like to discuss how I measure box office, just so we have an understanding as to how everything is collected. So usually, as you know, the rule, production and marketing, you have to consider both of those factors. Sometimes people just consider production, but marketing is a part of it, if that information is disclosed. So usually on that front, I would do a 2 times ratio. And then once I consider that, whatever that total is, I also then consider, which is step 2, theatrical distribution, because all these films are going to theaters, so they have to abide by distribution, and they have to also consider the kind of splits that go between studios and theater chains. Usually it's 50%, sometimes could be even as high as 55%. Internationally, it could be 40%. So it depends on the markets. You have to do some research to figure out, certain ratios and stuff like that. But once you consider the whole package, really, when you look at the cost of how much it is based on production and marketing, times that by 4, right? And that's how much the movie really has to make. So let's say a movie costs $200 million, right? So 100 million for production and 100 for marketing. Times that by 4, so the movie would have to do at least $800 million after distribution is taken into account. So I also include any publicly known, expenses such as, marketing or anything like reshoots, whatever. That information would also be considered if it was known about. If it's not available, then I'm just judging based on production alone or by what information is out there. So hopefully that all makes sense. And yeah, so let's get into May, because there was a lot of movies that came out in May. So strap in, because this might be a long video. So let's get into it. So the first major release that came out in May was The Devil Wears Prada 2. Um, I'm a little surprised by how much it's literally made, but I feel like some people will assume that it's a success, but once you break it down, you'll see that it actually came up a little short. So it had a budget of at least 100 million, which is significantly higher from what the first film was, and I think that's a lot to do with just the actresses, now and the actors, gaining popularity and stuff like that. So now they have more demands that they will bring to this production versus when they first were starting out. Um, but we also have marketing costs, supposedly of 80 million. That's why I have a question mark put there, because I never saw hard confirmation on it, but I think I do remember them stating like it was definitely pricey. So so we have an investment potentially of $180 million. So you times that by 2, the film would have to do at least $360 million in order to break even. But in order to get to that amount after distribution is taken into account, the movie would have to do $720 million. So theatrically speaking, The Devil Wears Prada 2 has made about $663.57 million. So in this case, for Disney, they have made about either 286.92 million or as high as 297.67 million dollars. So it's coming up a little short. And I think by at this point, yeah, it's been well over a month now. So I think that it's pretty much done. So I think that I think it's a lot to do with cost on this end. I mean, clearly there was an appetite for it, because making over $600 million is not something to just whiff at. I think this is just more to do with just cost. I think that if they had brought the budget down a little bit, I think that you probably would have been a lot more profitable. But with demands, I'm not going to blame solely the actresses, but I mean, I understand, like if you have the ability to make money, I understand, but at the same time, it does um, it does affect things, when it comes to overall trajectory, especially in the vein of something like this, which I honestly for the longest time I thought there was no way that people were going to care to watch this, but it kind of had that effect of the Barbie, sort of mentality, where people got to dress up and people got to look a certain way, and stuff like that. And I just, I think it was more to do with the budget on this end that affected, overall prospects for a return on investment. So yeah. So I mean, knowing how probably how the business works, and this, especially seeing how much it's made on a literal front, I wouldn't be shocked if there was a third movie. But really, in terms of how much it's made for the company, and how it looks for an overall investments, probably shouldn't get a third movie, but wouldn't be shocked if they ended up getting another one. All right, next film is Animal Farm. We talked about this. I did a review for it. Didn't hate it. I know a lot of people were down on it, but I didn't necessarily hate it. But regardless, nobody really went to watch it though, because it carried at least a $35 million budget, as far as I read. I don't know any marketing expenses as far as I've seen. So, 35 million as it stands. So times that by two, film would need to make at least $70 million in order to break even. Now, and considering distribution on top of that, the movie will need to have grossed at least $140 million in order to see that break even point come back to the studio. Theatrical wise, in this case, Angel Studios, 5.8 million is what is made in theaters, and for Angel Studios, they're looking at least $2.87 million, or as high as $3.15 million. So yeah, big failure here. I think this is a lot to do with just release window, and also a lack of marketing. I don't recall a lot of marketing for this, so there wasn't a lot of awareness, to the specific movie being coming out. But coming out against Devil Wears Prada, which went off and did a more substantial number than I even expected. Um, but putting that against that, and also a lack of marketing, and also I also a little bit to do with just the wouldn't say the backlash, but a lot of the negative reaction towards the film. I think also probably played a small part into it. So yeah, I mean, I think that this was what their first real. I mean, no, that's not true. They've done animated films, Angel Studios, like King of Kings and stuff like that. And there's there's hope, prospects for the future. They have the Young Washington film coming out, so who's to say that Young Washington comes out and does really well? I'm not expecting it to, but who knows? Who knows? But this just wasn't it. This just was not it. I think a real lack of marketing is what I think honestly really killed the trajectory for this film. All right, next film we're going to talk about is Hokum. This is a film that you guys may not uh, like. There's two obvious films that we'll be talking about towards the end of this video, which have done really well. Um, but this is another one that some people may not realize. Hokum actually ended up doing well. This had a budget of at least 5 million, as far as I've read. I don't know any marketing expenses attached to it, so as it stands, 5 million. Timesing that by two, the film would need to do at least $10 million in order to break even. In order to get to that number after distribution, the film would need to gross at least $20 million. Theatrically, made about 23.95 million. So in this case, Neon, they have made about 11.27 million, or as high as $12.12 million. So that's a success. So this is just more to the case of what and we'll further, further my discussion about horror being the future. That's going to get more validated as we get through this video, because we're definitely going to see some other hits for horror this specific month, this past month. But Holcomb was one of them. It just kind of came under the radar, but it was a small budgeted thing, so that's largely why also these films do well, because they don't have a lot riding on them in terms of production. So good on Holcomb, good on him, good on this film. Good to what's the filmmaker's name? I can read it here. Damian McCarthy. Good on him. So yeah, so there's your first success of the month with Holcomb, the first of a few to come in the vein of horror. We'll see as we get through the video. All right, next film is Mortal Kombat 2. Ay, it's funny that this film delayed itself like what, 5 or 6 months. This film was originally supposed to come out last year, I believe in like October, and then they decided to push it to May because they felt that it had better odds in this specific month. Well, clearly that was a bad decision. Because yeah, so budget wise, we're looking at 80 million. I don't know any marketing expenses attached to this, but stands 80 million. Times that by 2, the film would need to do at least $160 million in order to break even. And in order to get to that number after distribution, the film would need to gross at least $320 million. Theatrically speaking, the film was done about $127.98 million from the time I got this data, or got this number. So in this case, Warner Brothers made about at least $59.1 million, or as high as $63.05 million. So yeah, this is a failure. And supposedly there's a third film on the way. I don't know why. I mean, I guess they decided to greenlight one because they were really, really confident that this would do well. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it had to do with just a crowded month, because there was a lot of other films that came out this month as well, and surprise hits, also major hits that just took away from the interest of this film. So I think that the decision to push this to May, rather than leaving it in October, it just shows that it was also a really poor decision. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that it honestly probably would have done better if it was not such a crowded month. I think that something like October was probably way more appealing, way more understanding for a film like this. But they thought it would. They thought they can compete, and they came up short. So I mean, it seems like you're going to get a third movie. Maybe we'll see. But as far as I'm concerned, anyway, doesn't really deserve it. All right, next film is The Sheep Detectives. I really enjoyed this film. This was actually a really sweet film, um, but it didn't do all that great. This is carrying a budget of at least 75 million. Like I can see why, because a lot of the CG sheep. But investment wise, sitting at 75 million. I'm not familiar with any marketing expenses, so as it stands, 75 million. Break even point on this would have to be $150 million. Gross requirement of at least 300 million. Theatrically speaking, the film's gone on to make at least $115.57 million. So in this case, Amazon, they are seeing at least $52.25 million, or as high as $55.26 million going back to them. So yeah, so this didn't do great at all, really. It's really a flop. And I think it's a lot to do with just a lack of marketing, because there was a lot of good reception towards it. I mean, just generally, it seems like people enjoyed the film. I enjoyed the film also. But I think it was largely to do with, just a lack of marketing and also budgeting on this end. I think that it's way more expensive than it needed to be. I think that you needed to bring this budget down maybe like a solid 50 million would have been a lot more, understandable. But I think it's a lot to do with just the cast, with just who's involved in this case, and probably salaries in that end. Maybe Hugh Jackman or, other players, with coming in with certain demands and stuff like that. I have no idea. That's just speculation on my end. Um, and of course, the CG sheep, But yeah, I feel like, this is something that you could have done for cheaper, but you know, this just adds to the pile of Amazon's offerings. Well, I mean, there's another which we'll get into in June, which has also not done that great, which also stars one of the stars from this movie as well. So yeah, it's not but looking good for Amazon, but for them it's about how it does on streaming, not how it does in theaters. So this does not affect them at all, really, not at all. All right, next film we're going to look at is the Billie Eilish album film thing. I don't know how you would label it, but this one was co-directed by James Cameron, and it's what is it called? Hit Me Hard and Soft, the tour, live in 3D. That's why it was helmed by James Cameron also because of the 3D crowd. Um, but uh, But yeah, this had a budget of at least 20 million. Don't know any marketing expenses attached to this. So 20 million on this end, break even point of at least 40 million, gross requirement of at least 80 million. Theatrically speaking, it's made about 26.71 million. So the distributor in this case, Paramount, they're looking at least 11.67 million, or as high as 12.16 million going back to them. So, there's been a lot of these concert films, that have been trying to make their way to theaters. They're all trying to replicate what Taylor Swift's film did. I believe that's what it was, right? Taylor Swift's movie. Um, and that just, none of them are working. I think a lot to do. I think it's a lot to do with just the internet. It's just a lot to do with just that alone. I think Taylor Swift's just tapped into a specific point in time. But since then, it's just, it's not been really all that replicated. I know that's another was a film called The Moment or something like that. That tried to also be try to serve that sort of interest, that sort of people as well. But clearly, it's just not because also you're not using artists that people really like. I'm just being fair here. These are artists that like a few people know about. Billie Eilish is something that I'm familiar with because of my generation and stuff like that. But outside of that, it's like you might know a few people who know that name, but not everyone's knowing who that name is. So that also, and a lack of marketing also on this end as well. So, but yeah, they're trying to use these modern names to ring up interest, but the problem is that that's very exclusive to today and not, very not going outside of that for older generations or other generations, specifically made for one type of generation, and that generation can only muster up so many people to go to the movie theater nowadays. So, all right, next film we're going to look at is Obsession. This is probably the most successful film to come out this month, and arguably probably the most successful film outside of a major tentpole. Arguably one of the most successful movies of the year so far. Uh, this had a overall, just investment cost of $16 million. So just to break this down for you, this had a production cost I know of roughly like what $750,000, but I've also heard reports that it got as high as like $1 million. So I'm just gonna go by those higher reports. I know that generally people are saying 750,000, but also just to even it out, just to make a specific point, I'm just gonna say $1 million, but it may in fact just be 750,000. That's what I've heard a lot. But we also have to consider distribution on top of this. And as far as I've read, they bought out Obsession, this case Universal, for $15 million. So that package altogether That's $16 million. Don't know the marketing expenses related to this. I know they are putting a marketing campaign for this, at least now more so since the movie's gone and did really well. So I don't know how much that's produced, how much marketing costs are on that end, but generally we have 16 million on the table for production and distribution. So timesing that by two, the film would have to do about $32 million in order to break even. And in this case, a gross requirement after theatrical distribution of $64 million. How is it done? So far, theatrical gross, it's made $234.5 million. In this case, Universal, they're looking at either 109.92 million or as high as 117.98 million dollars. This is hugely profitable for this company, and I already hear that they're eagerly, wanting to work with this guy again. I guess he's got a new film work coming out with Aaron Paul. So yeah, he and this film is still, you know, and it's still going on and doing great. I think it's gonna be, uh, I think it's probably gonna be like number two or number three still. It's still in the top five, So and this movie's gained interest, which is a very rare feat for a movie. Usually in the second weekends, you see drop offs. Usually like 40 or 50%. This actually went up. I believe something was like what, like 18, 19% going up. And then the third weekend was the same, went up, but still a little bit lower, but still was an increase. This is all around a big success for this company. Top to bottom, it's a major success. No ifs or ands or buts about it. It is a huge, huge success for the company. So yeah, this guy, this filmmaker, what's his name, Curry Baker, he's got a career set for him, and how his next film performs, that's going to definitely tip the scales a little bit. But for now, he's hot. He's he's making his statement. He's made his mark. So where he goes with his next movie is where it's going to be interesting. But here in the now, he's eating real good. All right, next film we're going to look at is In the Gray. This is, I believe, Guy Ritchie. Guy Ritchie's next film. Uh, yeah, didn't do all that great. No disclosure of the production costs, but I've read it could be at least 59 million. So that's the number I'm going with. That's the one I read. Bless me. This had an investment, or so no marketing expenses attached to it really, or I've not seen any publicly known marketing expenses. So we're looking at investments of 59 million as it stands. So timesing that by two, the film would have to do at least 118 million dollars in order to break even. Gross requirement of at least 236 million after distribution is taken into account. So theatrical gross so far, 17.34 million. And studio wise, in this case, Black Bear Pictures, they're looking at 7.5 million or as high as 7.79 million going back to them. Yeah, I think this is all to do with marketing because I don't recall any marketing for this movie. I don't recall a single bit of advertisement outside of the one trailer. So I think that that's really the case for this movie. And I think, to be, also legit, compared to what Obsession was doing to this, I think that between the two movies, I think Obsession was going to get way more eyes than this movie was going to get. So, I think it's just unfortunate, timing between, the trend of interest that was coming for one movie, and then, with a film like this, there probably wouldn't have been as much interest, even with the marketing there. But because of a lack of marketing, it really submitted, the film's fate, at least in my eyes. So, because I didn't hear like terrible things about the film, I heard it's okay. I never was interested in it. I did a reaction to the trailer; it didn't really do much for me. But yeah, I think it's largely due to lack of marketing on this case. But really, between the two movies, Obsession was going to get way more eyes than this was ever going to in that specific weekend. All right, let's look at The Mandalorian and Grogu. Did a review for it. I was not really that impressed by the film. And well, this is shaping up to be potentially the uh, the worst performing Star Wars movie. Uh, we'll see how it all shapes out, but we're looking at a budget of at least $165 million. Marketing expenses also about $100 million, as far as I've read. I've read it's in the hundreds, or at least like they've suggested the outlets like, oh, it's pricey. So in that end, I'm guessing at least $100 million, because that's how much Disney usually likes to put up for their tentpoles. Um, so investment wise, we're looking at $265 million. So times that by two, the film would need to do at least $530 million in order to break even. But in order to get to that number, after distribution is taken into account, we have to times that by two again. Gross requirement of at least $1.06 billion. So theatrically speaking, the film was done about at least $296.18 million. In this case, Disney, the studio, they are seeing about at least $134.31 million, or as high as $142.22 million going back to them. Yeah, so Star Wars is just in a very rough spot right now. We did a whole video about it, about just where Star Wars is and why a film like Mandalorian Grogu was even made. I understand why it was made, because ultimately, when you look at Star Wars as a brand, The Mandalorian is probably the most positive thing that has come out from the modern Star Wars era so far. But translating a TV show into a feature film and putting that out in theaters, it's very, very difficult to get to have that audience come into the theater and to make as much money as it needs in order to you know to to break even. And just let's just put this in perspective for you. Obsession ended up taking up the number one spot when this movie ended up getting dethroned on its second weekend, from Obsession coming out and ended up doing more right on its second weekend, and then pushing this film to number two. That should tell you something. That should really, really tell you something. When a Star Wars movie is being dethroned, on its second weekend, that's really telling. So yeah, so this is probably going to end up being. We'll see, but I mean, as far as I've read, this is tracking the same as Solo, maybe even worse right now. So yeah, so they're just in a really rough spot, and we'll see what happens with their next film, Starfighter, coming out next year. Maybe that might, it should be a change of pace, but as it stands, Star Wars is just in a rough spot. So we'll see what the future holds for this franchise, because it's definitely in trouble. All right, next film we're looking at is Passenger. Now, of all the horror that came out this month, at least the more notable ones, this is the only one that didn't do well. This had a budget of at least 15 million. Don't know any marketing expenses attached to this. So 15 million as it stands. So times that by two, it needs to do at least 30 million to break even. In order to get to that number after distribution, the film will need to gross at least 60 million. Theatrical gross, we're looking at $29.81 million. So studio gross, in this case being Paramount, we're seeing about at least 13.68 million, or as high as 14.56 million, going back to them. This is the only one that didn't do well. Of all the major horrors or notable horror films that are out there in this past month, this is the only one that came up short. And I think this is purely due to just a lack of marketing. I don't recall a lot of marketing for it. And I remember there was like a few advertisements here and there, but not a whole lot, you know. And I think also, to be fair, I think also it has a lot to do with just what Obsession and other horrors were doing at that specific time, that a film like Passenger just didn't really get a whole lot of buzz for, or a whole lot of interest. Because I also didn't hear a lot of great things coming out from the specific movie either. So that probably also affected, its trajectory. Um, But yeah, so I think it's a lot to do with just what else was out at the time in for the genre and just for the interest there. Splitting the interest. There was just not as much when it came to Passenger at the end of the day. So, and I think purely also to do with a lack of marketing, a real good marketing campaign. I think also, kind of position the film to where it is right now. All right, these next two are only U.S. releases, so they didn't have a foreign release, and both have met at similar results. So this is I Love Boosters. This is Boots Riley. His next film. He's the guy who gave us "Sorry to Bother You." I believe that's what the film's called, which I remember I remember watching, and I think I liked. Um, this has a budget of 20 million, as far as I've read. Investment wise, no marketing expenses, as far as I read, or publicly known marketing expenses. It's 20 million on this end. This case, timesing it by two, it needs to do at least 40 million to break even, but needing a gross requirement of at least 80 million after theatrical distribution is taken into account. Theatrical gross so far, $8.65 million, and that's only to do with the domestic market because that's the only place that it's playing them. Studio wise, in this case, Neon, they're looking at least $4.32 million or as high as $4.75 million going back to them. Like I said, I think this is purely to do with just a lack of both marketing and a lack of market to put the movie in, because it's only being played here in the U.S. And I just don't remember any advertisements for this movie outside of the one trailer that popped up online. So yeah, lack of awareness means a lack of, a lack of money to be made, or finance, potential for the movie. And the same can be said for The Breadwinner. But the only difference between this and the I Love Boosters is that if you ever went to, I don't know if this was just a thing with Regal or if it's just generally was a thing with theaters, they played this trailer for this movie constantly. They would play this trailer every time. Like for the past few weeks where I was going to the theater, I was always being previewed to this specific movie. So I don't know if they had a deal with Regal or whatever, just to have that trailer being played on loop or whatever like that. But they they would advertise this movie a lot, or at least like when I always would go to the theater this past month, every time this trailer would play. So I don't know what was up with that, but it didn't really do much of anything because yeah. So had a budget of at least 25 million as far as I've read. I'm not confident about that. That's why there's a question mark, but that's what I read it from it. Marketing expenses don't have a number for that. So we're going by 25 million for production. So timesing that by two, the film would need to do at least $50 million. And the only way to get to the number to get to that after distribution is about a gross requirement of at least $100 million. Theatrical gross, looking at about $15.11 million. Studio wise, in this case, Sony, they're looking at about 7.55 million or as high as $8.31 million going back to them. So yeah, another big flop. I think largely to do with just, as I just pointed out with I Love Boosters, lack of marketing and a lack of market to play in. But I'm not trying to be mean or nothing, but like this is a film that I feel like you should just put out on streaming. Every time I saw that trailer, I was just thinking to myself, like, I mean, it's innocent, sure, but like I don't know who really is going to go out of their way to watch a movie like this in theaters, in the comfort of your home, like on Netflix or whatever like that. I feel like this is where it'd probably be a lot more suitable, but for a wide release, not really a wide release, but being a release in general in theaters, I just don't think that that's what this sort of thing is, you know. So so lack of market and a lack of marketing, and I personally also, I'm just saying, also a lack of interest, I think is what killed a lot of the hope for this specific movie. And last but not least, we have Backrooms. My brother actually went out and saw this, and he was actually kind of disturbed by it. As far as he told me, he wasn't. He had his thoughts on it. He wasn't like particularly crazy about it, but a lot of you were crazy about it because this has done great. This had a budget of at least 10 million, as far as I've read. I don't know any marketing expenses attached to it. So we have 10 million as it stands. So times that by 2, the film would need to have done 20 million in order to break even, and a gross requirement of at least 40 million after considering distribution. Theatrical gross, we have $220.63 million. Studio wise, in this case, A24, they're making up 102.55 million, or as high as 109.70 million dollars. Hugely profitable for the studio, and not only that, it is the highest grossing film from the studio, the highest grossing film for the studio, and it is coming from their youngest filmmaker that they have ever hired. So, yeah, so there's a very, very specific thing going on right now, which I did a video on, about these younger, filmmakers coming in, specifically filmmakers from YouTube, because this is also based off of a YouTube series from the same filmmaker, from the same director. That's the hot thing right now, and Backrooms. I think a lot of that was. A lot of that interest, was already embedded, because people were, I saw people talking about it online and stuff like that. And probably to do with what Film Like Obsession was doing, kind of cultivating, that kind of interest for, creating a conversation online and stuff like that. Backrooms then became a part of that conversation as well. And they have reaped large profit. I already heard that they're probably planning out a sequel for this movie already, which would not shock me at all. And I'm pretty sure this filmmaker is also going to be getting a lot of opportunities as well, which is also a really great thing. So yeah, Backrooms was a huge hit, and definitely something that A24 needed, because A24 has been struggling for a bit. So yeah, huge success for them. Huge success, all things considered. So if you're counting, that was about 13 films that we had just discussed. So a lot of movies came out in May. And of those 13 movies, well, only 10 of them, or only 3 of them have done well. Only 3 of them. And there's a common theme here. There's a very common theme here between these 3 movies. They are all horror. They are all horror. And they are all made for really, really cheap. Hokum was made for about $5 million. Obsession, as it stands, was about $1 million before distribution. It's about just $1 million. And for Backrooms, 10 million. So, and all these movies have done great. Hokum did well. Obsession and Backrooms have done great. And you look at the failures here. I mean, it is just all to do with these major tentpoles, and also a lot of a lack of marketing, for a lot of these projects, and I understand based on trajectory and stuff like that, and how much these productions have probably cost already. I understand that there might be hesitations to market, heavily, but it just this again just really proves my point once again of what I've been saying for the longest time. Horror is the future for film, and this month especially has shown us that people's interest, specifically in the younger demographics, they're leaning more towards horror. Because when you can outpace a Star Wars movie, that's telling you something also. So, uh, but I mean, this month was not good, or just flat out, and just wasn't a good month for film. But it was a very eye opening month as well, considering what did do well, specifically in the horror genre. So, but as it stands so far for the year, it's still not great. it's still not great. It's still a pretty down month. We'll see how the summer unfolds. There might be some successes here and there. Uh, Specifically, I think this weekend or next weekend we have Toy Story, so definitely we'll see some upsides here pretty soon. But still a down year, still a pretty down year, all things considered. But yeah, it was a packed month, but it was also a very down month. I think that horror is again the future. This month especially has proven that, or at least that it's proven that that the interest is leaning more towards that genre, and it is extremely profitable because it is very low budgeted a lot of the times, and it's the most appealing thing. I would argue when you go to the movie theater, because it's the more social and it works for a dating option. It's more accessible, for people when it comes to horror. Because you get a lot of different types of people, couples or just regular folks that will want to come and see a movie like that in the horror genre. Whereas with other movies like superheroes or Star Wars or whatever like that, you need prior knowledge and you need all these other factors to go on top of it, and it may detract someone from wanting to see those specific movies. So 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 hopefully Hollywood realizes what is happening, where the interest is truly going, and hopefully they start to gear in that direction or start to pull back on the budgets with these large tentpoles, because clearly it's not working. It's not working. But you guys, what are your thoughts? I need to have some breakfast because I literally just woke up like an hour ago. So sorry if my thoughts are also a little fuzzy. I just need to eat some breakfast soon. But you guys, let me know your thoughts on this past month, your thoughts on all of these films, the major successes that were with Obsession and Backrooms, and as well as the failings of Star Wars and other projects here and there. Let me know. And how do you feel about this month? How do you feel things are going to shape up? We have this Spielberg movie coming out this weekend. We have Toy Story. We have Supergirl. So we got some stuff. So we'll see where things land with those movies. But let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in and for sitting for probably this really long video. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.